returns to the life of Bruce Lee. In 1972, after 3 box office hits, Bruce Lee shot several test scenes for Game of Death and asked an old student to appear. The fiercest opponent in a series of kung fu confrontations would be Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Kareem was 7'2", Bruce was 5'7". Game of Death was Bruce's 4th film in just 2 years. He was exhausted and the Hong Kong heat was intense.
The soundstage was not air-conditioned. We shot it in Hong Kong in late August, early September. So that was a problem. Plus he had to act and he had to direct and he had to check out the choreography. And that wears on you.
In May of 1973, Bruce collapsed in a Hong Kong film studio. At the hospital, no clear diagnosis was made. Whatever the cause, Bruce recovered quickly and soon returned to work. Bruce never finished Game of Death. Shortly before his collapse, he had gotten a call from Hollywood to star in Enter the Dragon, a big-budget kung fu film. As shooting began in Hong Kong, Bruce understood that this was finally his shot at stardom in America.
Bruce expected that Enter the Dragon to do very well because it was exactly the way he wanted to do a martial arts film, and it featured him in the way that showed him off to the most spectacular.
Although this time he wasn't directing, Bruce choreographed the highly complex fight scenes in the film.
Under this drive for perfection, Lee and the other actors put in over 12 hours of work to recreate a single kung fu sequence.
He was so pleased with the way Enter the Dragon was done and how it came out. He was, however, unable to enjoy that success.
In July of 1973, while working on a script in a co-star's apartment, Bruce collapses again. He's rushed to the hospital. The worried family soon gathers. Rumors are flying. Is he alive? Everyone waits for a word. And the worst words come. Bruce Lee is dead. Family and friends are stunned. It's impossible, and it's true. On July 25th, the funeral was held in Hong Kong. It was like the death of a national leader. The streets along the funeral route were mobbed with the grieving and the curious. And outside the funeral parlor, the eyes of all the disbelieving fans were on Bruce's family.
The funeral in Hong Kong, you know, was just unbelievable. Of course, I was not in position to know what was going on in public because they just shuffled me to the funeral home and told me what I was supposed to do and all that. I think I was probably numb most of the time.
At the funeral parlor, the mourners passed by to see Bruce one last time. As Linda left for Seattle, she was besieged by reporters. What or who had killed Bruce Lee? Speculation ranged from drugs to the Chinese mafia to foul play by the bosses of rival Hong Kong studios. The inquest offered a reasonable explanation, but many still found Bruce's death suspicious and bizarre.
The speculation that surrounds Bruce's death, it always devastates me because it is such a focus of people's curiosity. I mean, of course, here this perfectly physically fit young man of 32 all of a sudden dies, and there is no external reason that's visible. He wasn't in a car accident. He didn't fall out of a building or anything like that.
On the day he lapsed into a coma, Bruce had taken a painkiller for a headache.
They determined that there was an ingredient in that tablet called meprobamate to which he was hypersensitive, much as a person who might be allergic to penicillin or to a bee sting. And what happens then is the fluid on the brain begins to expand. It's called cerebral edema. The fluid presses on the brain, person goes into a coma, and they die. And that is what happened to Bruce.
Back in Seattle, a second funeral was held, this one small and private.
I decided that I wanted him to be buried in Seattle, and it's so peaceful where he is, and I think that he would have been pleased by that decision.
Bruce's pallbearers included his old friends and students, Dan Inosanto, James Coburn, and Steve McQueen.
Thank you. May peace be with you. Okay, farewell.
3 weeks after his death, Enter the Dragon opened to huge audiences. The film made more than $10 million in its first month in America.
Of course, boom. As soon as it got into the theaters, it was a big Saturday matinee picture. Kids loved it, the parents enjoyed it, and everybody was just flabbergasted by this powerhouse, Bruce Lee. And it's a perennial. I mean, Bruce, this is the heart and soul of the genre. Enter the Dragon is it.
Warner Brothers presents Enter the Dragon. Starring Black Belt Hall of Fame, undisputed martial arts champion, and international film star Bruce Lee.
Everybody was kung fu fighting.
Bruce Lee's popularity led directly to an explosion of interest in the martial arts.
In fact, it was a little bit frightening.
Everywhere there were imitation Bruces. And today, more than 20 years after his death, say kung fu or karate, and people still think Bruce Lee. And untold numbers of kung fu films were released. Some were well-made, most were remarkably cheesy, and the never-ending search continued for a true successor to Bruce Lee. One possible successor was Bruce's own son, Brandon, who followed his father into martial arts films. After such movies as Rapid Fire and Showdown in Little Tokyo, Brandon Lee's career was prospering. And then it ended, like his father's, early and tragically. In March of 1993, on the set of the film The Crow, Brandon Lee was shot and killed in a firearms accident. Brandon's untimely death 20 years after his father's led some to speculate that fate has a cruel hold on the Lee family.
What happened to Brandon was purely accidental. I mean, in a million jillion years, you could not have planned the sequence of events that led up to Brandon's death. But I'm just hoping that this kind of talk kind of dies out. You know, that talk about the curse of the Lee family, the connection between Brandon and Bruce. And I think it makes a good story, a good headline, you know, and people are bound to play upon that. And it's very tragic.
Less than a month after Brandon's death, a campaign led by his sister Shannon to memorialize their father ended successfully when a star honoring Bruce Lee was placed on Hollywood Boulevard. Hollywood had finally accepted Bruce Lee as one of its own.
We proudly welcome to the Hollywood Walk of Fame, Bruce Lee.
And I think finally it took 20 years for Hollywood to realize that he really made a big impact on a lot of people.
He wanted to be an Asian person that could make a great action movie and have everybody appreciate the Asian martial arts and not really be worried about what color the star was.
He was a good teacher. I loved him a lot. He gave me a lot of things. I'm just sorry we couldn't have shared more, that's all.
"20 years after his mysterious death, Bruce Lee is still the only Asian ever to become a Hollywood superstar. But Bruce always considered himself a martial artist first and an actor second. A charismatic kung fu innovator, he did more to bring the martial arts to the attention of the American public than any other figure. I'm Peter Graves for A&E. Until next time on Biography.
Thank you.